There are stories told in the hushed tones of twilight, stories of grief and ghosts and the strange bargains people make when pushed to the edge of the world. Ilara's story began with one such bargain, born not of greed but of a defiant compassion that the town of Redemption Ridge had long since forgotten. 2 years after a logging accident had stolen her husband, Liam, and left her with 2 children and a mountain of debt, she was a ghost herself, haunting the dilapidated homestead that was both her sanctuary and her prison. The town whispered about another ghost, the Woodswight, a feral man who lived in the pines, a creature of rumor and fear. When the sanctimonious town council decided to hold a cruel public auction, not to sell him but to pay someone to drive him out, Ilara saw not a monster, but a reflection of her own isolation. She stood before the jeering crowd, her voice trembling but clear, and placed the winning bid, $1.26, the entire contents of her worn leather purse. They laughed, calling her the widow who bought a wicked woodsman. She led the silent, filthy man back to her land, his eyes downcast, a tangled beard hiding a face no one had seen. She settled him in the barn, on a bed of fresh hay, and left him a bowl of stew. She turned to leave, her heart a cold, tight knot of fear and folly, when a voice, rough as splintered wood and soft as moss, stopped her cold. It was the first sound he had made. And it was impossible. He whispered the last words her husband had ever said to her, a secret shared only with the stars on the night they lost their first child. "It's not your fault the sky fell, my love. We'll just build a new 1-inch." The impossible words hung in the dusty air of the barn, a shimmering, terrifying bridge between the man she had lost and the stranger she had just bought. Ilara fled back to the cabin, her breath catching in her throat, leaving the man to his silence and the echo of a memory he had no right to possess. For days, he was a phantom at the edge of her life, a silent force of nature. He never entered the house, but the evidence of his presence was undeniable. The sagging porch step was repaired, the wood split and stacked with an unnerving efficiency, the squeaking hinge on the well pump silenced. He moved with a purpose that belied his feral appearance, his hands, though calloused and scarred, showing a deep, instinctual knowledge of how things worked, how they fit together. He was gentle with her children, Leo and Maya, who watched him with wide, curious eyes, their innate innocence shielding them from the town's cultivated fear. One afternoon, Maya, clutching a small, worn wooden bird, dropped it near the barn. The man picked it up, his large fingers surprisingly delicate as he examined the simple carving. It was the last gift Liam had carved for her before he died. The man looked at it for a long time, then retreated into the barn's shadows. The next morning, sitting beside the original, was a new bird, carved from a piece of fresh pine. It was not a copy, it was a perfect, soul-deep replica, down to the small, unintentional notch on the left wing where Liam's knife had slipped. Ilara felt a wave of dizziness. This was no coincidence. It was a second haunting, a deeper and more frightening mystery than the first. The man in her barn wasn't just a stranger, he was a vessel for her husband's ghost, a walking, breathing reliquary of her most private sorrows and joys. The outside world intruded upon their fragile, strange ecosystem in the form of a crisp, cream-colored envelope. The letterhead read Omnicorp Land Development, and the contents were a sterile blend of corporate politeness and veiled menace. It was a formal offer to purchase her 300 acres, an offer so insultingly low it felt more like a demand for surrender. The final paragraph was the real threat, a clinical mention of the substantial back taxes she had inherited, and a subtle suggestion that Omnicorp could make such problems disappear if she were to cooperate. Despair, a familiar and unwelcome guest, settled over Ilara. She was sitting on the porch swing, the letter trembling in her hand, when the man emerged from the barn. He saw the look on her face, the stark white of the paper against her worn jeans. He didn't speak, but he walked over and stood before her, his presence a solid, grounding weight. For the first time, he initiated contact, his calloused hand gently covering hers, stilling the tremor of the letter. His touch sent a jolt through her, not of fear, but of an inexplicable, profound comfort. It felt like coming home. As if on cue, the sky began to darken, a low rumble of thunder echoing from behind the western peaks. A storm was rolling in, a physical manifestation of the tempest brewing inside her heart. He didn't let go of her hand. He simply stood there with her, a silent guardian against the encroaching darkness, both the one in the sky and the one folded neatly in the Omnicorp envelope. He was her wicked woodsman, and in that moment, she felt safer than she had in 2 long years. The garden behind the cabin had been Liam's pride, a vibrant patch of life he had coaxed from the rocky soil. Since his death, it had withered into a tangle of weeds and dust, a testament to Ilara's own fallow grief. One morning, she saw the man standing in the middle of it, his head bowed. Then, with a shovel he'd found and repaired, he began to turn the earth. The work was hard, breaking up the compacted soil, but he worked with a relentless, steady rhythm. Hesitantly, Ilara fetched a hoe and joined him. They worked side by side for hours, the shared labor a silent conversation. They were not just tilling a garden, they were excavating a life, turning over the hard soil of the past to make way for a potential future. That evening, the air was cool and clear after the storm. Leo, her inquisitive 8-year-old, was on the porch, pointing at the darkening sky. "What's that one?" he asked, pointing to a bright cluster of stars. Before Ilara could answer with its proper name, the man's voice, still raspy from disuse, drifted from the shadows of the barn. "Your father called that the Great Bear's Arrow." Ilara's heart stopped. It was true. It was Liam's silly, private name for the constellation Cassiopeia. It was a secret between a father and a son. She stood up, her hands clenched, and walked directly to him. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice shaking. "How do you know these things?" He flinched, his eyes wide with a genuine, raw terror. He clutched his head as if in pain. "I don't know," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I don't know my own name. The things, they're just there. In my head." Like echoes in an empty room in his tortured expression, she saw the truth. He wasn't malicious. He was a prisoner of memories that weren't his own, as lost and haunted as she was. Her fear dissolved, replaced by a fierce, protective wave of empathy. The corporate threat soon grew a face. A sleek black car, entirely out of place on their rutted dirt road, crunched to a halt in front of the cabin. A man in a tailored suit and polished shoes stepped out, his smile as artificial as the car's leather interior. "Mrs. Croft?" "I'm Arthur Thorne, from Omnicorp." He spoke with an air of condescending authority, as if her cooperation was a foregone conclusion. He didn't wait for an invitation, stepping onto her porch and launching into a patronizing speech about progress and the inevitability of development. He gestured vaguely at the peeling paint and overgrown fields. "Clearly, this land is more than you can handle. We're offering you a way out." A clean slate. His eyes flickered towards the barn, where the man was mending a fence post. A sneer touched Thorne's lips. "I see you found some help. You'd be surprised what kind of vagrants wander these woods." At the insult, the man straightened up. He set down his tools and walked slowly, deliberately, towards the porch. He didn't run, he didn't shout. He simply moved until he was standing on the bottom step, a silent, imposing wall of muscle and dirt-stained denim, placing himself squarely between Thorne and Ilara. His gaze was level and unblinking. He said nothing, yet his silence screamed a primal warning. Thorne, for all his slick confidence, took an involuntary step back. His smile faltered. He cleared his throat, adjusting his tie. "I'll be in touch," he said, the words clipped. He turned and retreated to his car, unnerved by the quiet intensity of the man he dismissed as a vagrant. As he drove away, dust kicking up behind him, Ilara knew this was far from over. Thorne had seen not just a homesteader to bully, but an unexpected protector he would need to remove. The confrontation with Thorne acted like a key in a rusty lock, jolting something loose in the woodsman's fractured mind. The echoes in his head grew louder, twisting into agonizing shards of memory. He was plagued by debilitating headaches and nightmares that left him gasping in the hay, slick with sweat. He would cry out names and phrases that meant nothing to Ilara. Sublevel 3, protocol failure, serum 734. One night, a violent thunderstorm crashed over the ridge, the sky splitting open with light and sound. Ilara was woken by a raw scream from the barn. She rushed out into the deluge, finding him thrashing in the hay, his eyes wide with unseeing horror. As a bolt of lightning illuminated the barn's interior in a stark, brilliant flash, he arched his back and screamed a name that made Ilara's blood run cold. Dr. Aries Thorne! Not Arthur, the name the man had used, but Aries. Dr. Thorne. The name was followed by a choked whisper. Project Chimera. The memories came in a flood then, not just echoes of Liam, but flashes of his own erased past. He saw sterile white rooms, the glint of needles, the cold, analytical face of Dr. Thorne overseeing his torment. He wasn't a wild man who had gotten lost. He was an experiment. He had been a soldier, perhaps, or a man with a past they wanted to wipe clean. The empathy, the psychic connection to Liam's memories, must have been a catastrophic, unforeseen side effect of a procedure meant to erase his identity and create a programmable asset. He had been dumped in these woods like a piece of faulty equipment, left to die. The man in her barn was not just a mystery, he was a survivor of something monstrous, and his creator had just come looking for him. Dr. Thorne, having identified his escaped asset, dispensed with all pretense of corporate negotiation. He wanted his property back, and he hired a man who specialized in retrieving things that didn't want to be found. The man's name was Silas, a bounty hunter with a face like a road map of old fights and eyes as cold and empty as a winter sky. He arrived on a Tuesday, while Ilara and the children were in town for supplies. Silas didn't bother with the front door. He moved with the quiet lethality of a predator, slipping into the barn where the man, Soellen, a name that had surfaced in his fevered dreams, was repairing a leather harness. The attack was sudden and brutal. Silas was fast, skilled, and armed with a taser and a weighted sap. But Soellen was not the same man who had been dragged from the woods. He was stronger, anchored by a purpose he hadn't had before. He was defending not just himself, but the first home he could remember. The barn became a whirlwind of motion and desperate violence. Silas fought with practiced cruelty, but Soellen fought with the raw, ferocious power of a cornered bear. He absorbed punishing blows, his body a testament to the resilience forged in the wilderness, and answered with untaught, instinctual force. He managed to disarm Silas, the fight devolving into a primal struggle. In the end, it was Soellen's sheer strength that won. He pinned Silas to the ground, his hands around the bounty hunter's throat, rage and pain contorting his face. He could have ended it. But looking into the man's terrified eyes, he saw a reflection of his own past fear, and the inherent gentleness that was his true nature won out. He released his grip. Silas gasped for air, scrambled away, and fled, leaving a bloody trail from his split lip. He paused at the tree line, turning back to his promise, "He'll send more of us. We'll burn this place to the ground." The sanctuary had been violated. War was coming to their door. They knew Silas's threat was not an idle one. As dusk settled, Ilara and Soellen worked with a grim, shared purpose, transforming the simple cabin into a makeshift fortress. They boarded up the lower windows, dragged heavy furniture against the doors, and loaded the old double-barreled shotgun Liam had kept for hunting. The slow, quiet rhythm of their life had shattered, replaced by the frantic, high-pitched hum of imminent danger. The children were asleep in the back room, blissfully unaware of the siege their mother was preparing for. In the flickering lamplight, with the scent of old wood and gunpowder hanging in the air, Soellen finally spoke, the words pouring out of him, a confession and an explanation all at once. He told her everything he now remembered about Project Chimera, about the pain and the erasure. Then his voice softened. "When I was in the woods, I thought I was losing my mind," he said, his gaze meeting hers, vulnerable and honest. "There were these feelings, these pictures, a love for you, a need to protect the children. It wasn't mine, but it was all I had. It's like Liam's soul was too strong to be erased completely. When I ended up here, on his land, it left an echo inside me. That echo is what kept me human. It's what led me back to you." It was the most beautiful and heartbreaking thing Ilara had ever heard. This strange, impossible connection was not a haunting, but a miracle. A legacy of love passed from one good man to another. Outside, the storm that had threatened for days finally broke, the wind howling around the eaves and rain lashing against the windows, nature's fury mirroring the violence they knew was coming for them. They sat in the charged silence, no longer a widow and a woodsman, but but two soldiers waiting for a battle, their hands finding each other in the dark. The assault began just after midnight, a pair of headlights cutting through the torrential rain. The black car returned, this time with a battered pickup truck right behind it. Thorne, Silas, and two other hired thugs emerged, armed and moving with grim intent. The night erupted into chaos. The first shotgun blast from Ilara shattered the window next to the door, a deafening roar that sent them scrambling for cover. They returned fire, bullets splintering the log walls of the cabin. It was a desperate, terrifying fight. Soellen, using the darkness and his intimate knowledge of the property, was a wraith. He slipped out the back and used the storm as cover, disabling their truck before engaging one of the thugs near the woodpile, his movement swift and brutally efficient. Inside, Ilara reloaded with trembling hands, Leo and Maya crying in the back room, her fear for them a hot poker in her gut. She was protecting her children, her home, her past and her future. Silas managed to kick the door in, but Soellen came crashing back through a side window, tackling him to the floor. The final confrontation came down to the architects of their pain. Dr. Thorne cornered Ilara, a pistol in his hand, his face a mask of fury. "He is my creation. My property," he screamed over the storm. Before he could fire, Soellen was there. Thorne, seeing his experiment standing tall and defiant, tried one last gambit. He yelled a string of code words, a neurological trigger sequence meant to incapacitate him. But the man before him was no longer a blank slate. "My name," he growled, his voice thick with reclaimed identity, "is Soellen." He lunged, disarming Thorne with a single, powerful motion. As Thorne crumpled, Silas made one last, desperate move towards Ilara. Soellen intercepted him, a final, decisive collision that ended the threat for good. As the last of the intruders was subdued, the raging storm outside began to quiet, the rain softening to a gentle patter. The siege was over. In the quiet aftermath, the flashing blue and red lights of the sheriff's cars seemed impossibly bright against the dawn. The exposure of Dr. Aries Thorne and his illegal human experiments at Omnicorp became a national scandal. He and his captured associates disappeared into the maw of the federal justice system, and the threatening letters and claims against Ilara's land vanished with them. Life on the ridge slowly found its way back to a new kind of normal. The dead garden, once a symbol of loss, was now a riot of green shoots and burgeoning life, tended by two pairs of hands. Soellen, no longer a silent phantom, became a fixture of their days. The deep echoes of Liam's memories had softened, integrating into his own slowly returning sense of self, leaving behind not a ghost, but a profound foundation of love and decency. The tension of their shared trauma gave way to a gentle, heartwarming peace. Maya, laughing, would run to him, her arms outstretched. "Push me, Papa Soellen, higher." He would smile, a true, easy smile, and send her soaring towards the sky. Leo, initially wary, began to treat him as a confidant, attempting to teach him the complicated rules of baseball in the front yard, their clumsy throws and missed catches filling the air with laughter. One evening, as the sun bled orange and purple across the horizon, Ilara sat beside him on the newly repaired porch swing. She took his hand, the callous a familiar and comforting texture against her own. She knew the miracle she had been given. Soellen wasn't a replacement for the husband she had lost. He was an answer to a prayer she hadn't known she'd uttered, a way to honor the past while building a future. She leaned her head against his shoulder, a simple, perfect gesture of belonging. He looked down at her, his eyes clear and full of a love that was entirely his own, and he spoke the words that had begun it all, not as an echo of the past, but as a promise for all their tomorrows. "It's not your fault the sky fell, my love. We'll just build a new 1 inch.